The first time I really noticed the man next door, I was sitting on my front steps crying over a broken coffee mug. Not just any mug, the one my grandmother left me, cream-colored, with a small chip on the handle she'd fixed years ago with a dab of superglue. I'd been rushing that morning, the way I always rushed in those last months of my marriage, and I knocked it off the counter reaching for my keys. It shattered on the kitchen tile. I picked up the pieces, wrapped them in a dish towel, carried them outside like I was going to do something with them, and then just sat down on the front steps and cried. That's when I saw him. He was across the street loading something into the back of a black truck. Older, maybe late 40s, early 50s. Broad shoulders, moving quietly, efficiently, like a man who didn't waste anything. He had a black lab with him, sitting at his feet with the patience of a dog who'd seen a lot. The man glanced over once, didn't stare, didn't look away fast the way people do when they're pretending not to notice. He just nodded, slow, easy, like acknowledging the weather. I wiped my face and went back inside. That was March. By April, everything I'd built over 4 years was gone. My ex-husband's name was Ryan. We met at 26, married at 28, and by 32, I was sitting in a lawyer's office in downtown Portland trying to understand how a woman who'd given up a master's program, a job in Seattle, and 4 years of her life could walk away with almost nothing. The answer, I learned, was a prenuptial agreement. Ryan had presented it 6 weeks before our wedding. I remember thinking the timing was strange. My family was in town, the invitations had already gone out, his mother had already bought her dress. He sat me down at the kitchen table with a glass of wine I hadn't asked for and slid a folder across to me. He said it was just a formality. His father's financial advisor had suggested it. He said it in the same tone he used to talk about car insurance. I read it. I asked questions. He answered them with calm, reasonable explanations that somehow added up to, if this marriage ends, you leave with what you came in with. What I came in with was a used Subaru and $4,300 in savings. I signed it. Because I was 28 and I was in love and I believed that prenuptial agreements were for people who expected to get divorced. And we weren't those people. We were, it turned out, exactly those people. The fertility issues started in year 2. My OB referred us to a specialist in Lake Oswego, a woman with a kind face and very direct eyes who walked us through testing and statistics with the efficiency of someone who delivered difficult news many times. The results came back. Nothing conclusive on my end. Ryan never completed his portion of the testing. He said he was busy. He said he'd get to it. He never did. What I know now, what I knew then but couldn't quite hold on to, is that Ryan didn't actually want a baby. He wanted the idea of wanting a baby. He wanted the idea of wanting a baby. He liked the version of himself that was trying for something. He didn't like doctors' offices or conversations about sperm counts or the particular vulnerability of actually letting a problem be examined. So we stopped trying and he stopped pretending, and something went quiet between us that never came back. By year 3, he was coming home after 10 most nights. He said it was work. He worked in commercial real estate, so late nights weren't impossible. I told myself that. I told myself a lot of things. The woman he was seeing worked in his office. She was 24. I found out the same way most people find out. I saw a text I wasn't supposed to see. He didn't deny it. He actually seemed relieved. That was February. By March, he'd asked me to move out by the end of the month. Our house, his house, technically, purchased before we married, had already been presented to her as a future home. He was thorough like that. I called my sister in a parking lot at 9 at night and cried so hard I couldn't form full sentences. She wanted to fly out. I told her not to. I didn't want anyone to see me like that. I didn't want to be someone people had to come see. I found an apartment in Northeast Portland. Small, second floor, a kitchen that got good light in the morning. I paid my deposit, signed my lease, and drove home to start packing. Ryan was there when I arrived. He was sitting at the kitchen island with a folder, the same kind he'd used for the prenup, and he said we could settle everything without attorneys if I was reasonable. He slid a paper across the counter. It was an agreement. In exchange for my signature, he would give me $4,800 and waive any claim to the Subaru. I stood there for a long moment. 4 years. the Seattle job, the master's program, fertility appointments. I attended alone because he was too busy. Dinners, I made and ate by myself. Nights, I spent convincing myself I wasn't lonely. $4,800. I wanted to say something that cut. I wanted to find the exact sentence that would make him understand what he'd taken. But I looked at his face, calm, prepared, already somewhere else in his mind, and I understood that there was no sentence. He'd already decided what this was worth. I signed it. I took the check. I carried my boxes to the Subaru in 4 trips. The apartment was quieter than I expected. Not peaceful quiet, hollow quiet. The kind that makes you aware of every sound you make, your own footsteps, the refrigerator hum, the neighbor's TV through the wall. I didn't sleep well the first 2 weeks. I ate cereal for dinner more than I should admit. I called my mom every other day and told her I was fine because she had enough to worry about and because saying fine out loud sometimes made it feel more true. I went back to work. I managed communications for a mid-sized nonprofit in the Pearl District, and I was good at that. I was always good at the work. The work didn't ask me to explain myself. That was April. By May, I started to breathe again, a little. The man across the hall from me, I'd noticed him a few times in passing. He was quiet, nodded when we passed in the corridor, held the elevator once without making a thing of it. He had the kind of face that was hard to age, somewhere between 40 and 55, with lines around his eyes that came from something other than just sun. His dog, the black lab, same one I'd seen the day I was crying on my old front steps, was apparently named Scout, and Scout was the first one who officially introduced us. I was coming home from the farmer's market one Saturday morning, bags in both arms, and Scout pressed his nose directly into my grocery bag with the confidence of a dog who's been allowed to get away with things. Scout. His voice was low, no nonsense. Back. The dog backed up, sat, and looked genuinely apologetic in the way labs can. I laughed. It surprised me. I hadn't laughed easily in weeks. It's okay. He smelled the peaches. He smells the peaches. He smells everything. A pause. Sorry about that. Truly, don't worry about it. I shifted the bags. I'm Josie. Marcus, he said. We didn't shake hands because I was holding groceries. He just nodded, same as he had that first day across the street, and we each went back to our doors. That was it for a while. Marcus wasn't unfriendly, he just wasn't a talker. I'd see him in the mornings sometimes, walking Scout before the neighborhood woke up. We'd wave. Once he held the lobby door when my hands were full. Once I saw him helping an elderly woman from the 3rd floor carry something down the stairs, and he did it without any production. Just carried it down and set it where she pointed and went back upstairs. I noticed things about him the way you notice things about people when you live close to them. He kept odd hours. Sometimes I'd hear him leave very early. Sometimes he wasn't around for days. He didn't have packages delivered like most people did. He had one recurring visitor, another man, close to his age, who arrived in a gray sedan every few weeks and was usually gone within an hour. I didn't ask. It wasn't my business. What shifted things was a Tuesday evening in June. I'd had a terrible day. A board presentation that got rescheduled 3 times, a GRET report due by 5, and then my car, the faithful Subaru, made a sound on the drive home that I recognized as expensive. I pulled into the parking garage, cut the engine, and sat there with my head tipped back. When I finally got out, Marcus was a few spaces over, loading something into the back of his truck. "Rough one?" he said. I must have looked worse than I thought. "My car is making a sound," I said. "The kind that has a comma after it in the estimate." He didn't say anything for a second. Then, "What kind of sound?" Like I did a bad impression of it. Rattling, rhythmic, from the front somewhere. He set down what he was holding. "Can you pop the hood?" 20 minutes later, he'd identified the problem, a failing CV axle joint, and given me the name of a mechanic on Belmont that he said was honest. He didn't lecture me about car maintenance. He didn't make me feel stupid for not knowing what a CV axle was. He just told me what it was and what it would probably cost, less than I'd feared, and closed the hood. "Thank you," I said, seriously. "It's not a big deal." "It is to me," I said. "I've been trying really hard not to need things lately, and I've been trying really hard not to need things lately, and I stopped. I hadn't meant to say that. Never mind. Thank you. He looked at me for a moment, not the way people look when they're deciding whether to ask a follow-up question. More like the way people look when they've already understood something and are deciding whether to say so. The mechanic's name is Pete, he said. Tell him Marcus sent you. He'll be straight with you. He picked up what he'd been carrying and went back to the elevator. I stood there in the parking garage for a minute, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not romance. I wasn't anywhere near that. Something simpler, like being seen without having to explain myself first. The summer passed slowly and then all at once. Marcus and I started talking more. Never planned. It was always incidental. He'd be on the building's rooftop patio with Scout in the evening sometimes, and I'd go up to read and we'd end up talking for an hour. He didn't overshare and he didn't ask me to, but gradually in pieces, I told him things. I told him about Ryan. Not all of it, not at first. But enough. He listened the way some people listen, actually listening, not waiting to respond. He told me he'd been in the Army for 12 years, special operations. He said it plainly, without weight or drama. He'd been out for about 6 years. He said he'd done some things after that he couldn't fully talk about, but that he was settled now, in Portland for the foreseeable future. I asked him once what he did now. Consulting, he said. For? A small pause. Private clients, security and risk assessment. I accepted that. I didn't push. In August, my sister came to visit, and I took her to breakfast and she watched me talk about my neighbor Marcus for 20 minutes before she raised an eyebrow. You like him, she said. I don't, he's just a person I know. It's not like that. Okay, she said. She was smiling into her coffee. It's genuinely not. Josie, she said, you've smiled more in the last 20 minutes than you did the last 3 times I saw you combined. I didn't have an answer for that. What changed things was September. I ran into Ryan at a friend's birthday gathering in the Pearl District, the kind of accidental encounter that feels like a small punishment from the universe. He was there with her. She was very young and very pretty, and she was wearing a ring. Ryan saw me across the room and came over, because Ryan always moved toward awkward situations with the confidence of someone who believed he was never the problem in them. He asked how I was. He said I looked good. He mentioned, casually, the way you mentioned the weather, that he and Kayla were moving to the larger house in Lake Oswego. He said he hoped I was landing on my feet. I said I was fine. He nodded with the expression of a man who'd done a kind thing and knew it. I drove home and sat in my car in the parking garage for the 2nd time that year. Then I went upstairs and knocked on Marcus's door, which I had never done before. And when he opened it, I said, I know this is strange, but do you want to take Scout for a walk? I need to move. He looked at me for 1 second, got his jacket, got Scout's leash. We walked for an hour and a half. He didn't ask me to explain. Somewhere around the 2nd mile, I started talking anyway. The party, Ryan, the ring, the house in Lake Oswego, the way Ryan had said landing on your feet like I was a stray cat. Marcus walked and listened and didn't offer me platitudes. When I ran out of words, he said, You're already on your feet. You just can't see it from where you're standing yet. It wasn't a big speech. That was the point. When we got back to the building, in the elevator, I started crying. Not the dramatic, heaving kind, but the quiet kind, which is somehow worse. He didn't make a thing of it. He just put one hand briefly on my shoulder, steady and warm, and then the elevator opened and we both went to our separate doors. That night, I understood that I had a problem. The problem was that I had feelings for my neighbor, who was private in ways I didn't fully understand, who lived across the hall and walked his dog in the dark and consulted for clients he never named. And I was 31 years old and recently divorced, and the last time I trusted my instincts about a man I signed a prenuptial agreement over a glass of wine I didn't ask for. It was my sister who figured it out first. Of course it was. She called me 3 weeks after her visit. She'd been Googling, she said she was curious, and Marcus wasn't hard to find if you knew what you were looking for. She texted me a link. He had been decorated twice for service in Afghanistan. After leaving the army, he'd co-founded a private intelligence and security consulting firm. The firm was not small. The firm had offices in Portland, Washington, D.C., and London, and had contracts with several federal agencies and multiple Fortune 500 companies. His net worth, according to a financial profile from 2 years ago, was estimated in the tens of millions. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time. Then I knocked on his door. I showed him the article without saying anything. He looked at it, then at me, then set my phone down on the counter. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" "When I was sure it was the right time." "Marcus." I heard something in my own voice I didn't like. Not anger exactly, something more tired than that. "I told you about my marriage. I told you about my marriage. I told you about the prenup. I told you things I haven't told most people. And you've been, what? Deciding if I'm trustworthy enough to know basic facts about you?" "No." He said it firmly. "That's not what this was." "Then what was it?" He was quiet for a moment, long enough that I started to turn toward the door. "I've been in situations," he said, "where the first thing people know about me is what I'm worth. And it changes how they see me. It changes everything." He paused. "I didn't want you to look at me that way. I wanted to know who I was to you before that was part of it." I turned back. "That's not fair," I said. "You got to decide when I knew. I didn't get a choice in that." "You're right," he said. "I know." We stood there. "I'm not angry about the money," I said finally. "I'm angry because I told you I've had a hard time trusting people, and you were sitting on something that would have been relevant to that conversation." "I know," he said again. "Okay," I said. "Okay," I said. "Okay. I need a few days," I said. "But okay." I went back to my apartment. I thought about it for 3 days, not obsessively, not in circles, but honestly, and the honest conclusion I kept arriving at was, everything he'd actually done, every real thing, had been consistent. The man who carried boxes for the third-floor neighbor, the man who found a mechanic and said, "Tell him I sent you," the man who walked with me for an hour and a half in September without once making it about himself. He'd kept a secret. He'd told himself a story about why that was protective. He was wrong, but it didn't undo the rest of it. I knocked on his door on the 4th day. He opened it and waited. "I've been trying to figure out the difference," I said, "between someone keeping something private and someone hiding who they are. I think you were doing the first one badly and it looked like the second one." He nodded slowly. "Don't do that again," I said. "I won't," he said. "That was October. Things shifted after that. Not dramatically. Nothing with Marcus was ever dramatic, but they shifted in the way that matters, the solid, gradual way. We stopped being neighbors who talked and became something without a clean category, which was fine, which was actually better than most of the things I'd had categories for. In November, I found out I was pregnant. I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time with the test in my hand. I was 31 years old. I had been divorced for 8 months. I was living in a second-floor apartment with a good morning kitchen, and I had $4,800 for my marriage and 3 years of 403(b) contributions and a lease that ran through July. I thought about Ryan telling his specialist he was too busy. I thought about 3 years of quietly grieving something I'd been told was my fault. I stood up, washed my hands, went across the hall, and knocked on Marcus's door. He took one look at my face and held the door open. I showed him the test. He was quiet for a moment, not shocked, not retreating. Present. He sat down on the couch and said, "Tell me what you're thinking." "I don't know yet," I said. "I needed to tell someone first before I could think." He nodded. "Okay." "Okay meaning what?" "Meaning whatever you need," he said. "I'm here. That's not going anywhere." At the 8-week appointment, the midwife angled the ultrasound monitor toward me and said, "So, there are 2. I stared at the screen. "Twins," she confirmed. I had no framework for that sentence. I sat with it for what felt like several minutes while she talked about monitoring and appointments, and the difference between fraternal and identical, and I heard approximately 40% of it. I called my mother from the parking lot. She cried. Then she asked if I was okay, and I said I didn't know yet, and she said that was honest, and she'd be on the first flight she could manage. My mother was there within the week. She met Marcus for dinner that first night, just the three of us at a Thai place on Alberta, and I watched her watching him the way mothers watch the people their daughters have chosen. She asked him questions that sounded like ordinary dinner questions and were not ordinary dinner questions, and he answered them without deflecting, without performing. At some point, she asked him about the army and he told her a few things, careful things, and she nodded like she was taking notes in her head. On the walk back to the car, she took my arm and said, "He's the real thing, Josie." I already knew, but it was good to hear. Ryan found out the way I knew he would eventually find out, through mutual friends, the osmosis of a social network that never fully divides after a divorce. He called me on a Thursday night in January, which was the first time we'd spoken since I signed the settlement. He asked if it was true. I said yes. He was quiet. Then he said something about how he hoped I'd thought through the situation carefully given the circumstances. He said it in his measured, reasonable voice, the one that had once made me feel like I was the excitable one for having feelings. "The circumstances," I said. "Josie, you're having twins. You're not. You don't have the kind of stability, Ryan," I said. "I'm going to stop you there." He stopped. "You don't get to have an opinion about my stability," I said. "You forfeited that. You forfeited it when you handed me a settlement agreement over the counter like I was a business transaction. You don't get to call me 8 months later and speak to me like you're still evaluating me." A long pause. I know what you were doing," I said. "Goodbye, Ryan." I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a moment. Then I went and sat on the couch and thought, I should have said something like that a long time ago. And then I thought, the timing was exactly right. Any earlier and it wouldn't have been true yet. The pregnancy was not easy. Preeclampsia developed at 32 weeks, which meant hospital monitoring, which meant bed rest, which meant a complete reorganization of what I thought the last stretch was going to look like. My mother stayed. Marcus was there in the ways he was consistently there, picking up prescriptions, driving me to appointments, sitting in hospital waiting rooms with the patience of a man who knew how to wait in uncertain situations and had made his peace with it. My sister flew in at 35 weeks. She and Marcus figured out how to coexist in a way that mostly involved her asking him increasingly pointed questions and him answering them in ways that seemed to satisfy something she was checking off a list. On the day I went into labor, she was the one holding my hand on the left side and Marcus was on the right, and my mother was somewhere behind me saying prayers in a low voice that I found, genuinely, very comforting. 2 girls. Both healthy. The smaller one was 4 pounds 14 ounces. The bigger one was 5'2". They put them both on my chest and I said something I don't fully remember, and Marcus put his hand on the back of my head and I could feel that he was trying not to cry in a way that told me he was not going to succeed. He didn't succeed. We named them Pearl and June. Pearl for my grandmother, who had a name too ordinary to be interesting and a spirit too interesting to be ordinary, and June for the month when things had started, quietly, to turn around. Ryan heard about the birth through the same social network. He didn't call this time. He sent a text that said congratulations and nothing else, which was the right amount. What I hadn't told him, what he found out, I'm certain, eventually, was that Marcus had purchased the house Ryan and Kayla had moved to in Lake Oswego. Not with malice. It was a strategic investment through one of his firm's real estate holdings, a transaction that had been in motion for months, and when it completed, Marcus mentioned it to me the same way he mentioned most things, plainly, without theater. "You own Ryan's house?" I said. "The firm does," he said. "The firm does," he said. "Technically, Marcus. It was a good acquisition," he said. Then, after a moment, "He'll be notified about the new property management company next month." I thought about Ryan opening that letter. Ryan, who had handed me a settlement at the kitchen counter and told me he hoped I was landing on my feet. Ryan, who had called me in January to evaluate my stability. "Okay," I said. "Okay," Marcus said. "Pearl and June are 14 months old now. Pearl walks first, determined, slightly reckless, Scout's devoted shadow. June is more deliberate. She studies things before she commits to them, which my mother says is exactly like me at that age. My mother was right, by the way. Not about everything. But about Marcus. There are things I still learn about him. He's not a simple person, and he doesn't pretend to be. He has mornings that belong to him, and I don't ask about them. He has work that I understand in outline and not in detail, and that is fine. He is someone I trust. Not blindly, not because I've decided to override my own judgment, but because his actions and his words have been the same thing for going on 2 years now, and that is a rarer quality than most people admit. I think sometimes about who I was the morning I sat on my front steps crying over a broken coffee mug, how small everything had become, how certain I was that the smallness was permanent. I have my grandmother's mug on a shelf in the kitchen now. I glued it back together last spring. You can see where it broke. The lines are still there, thin silver seams where the pieces meet. I thought about hiding them. Then I decided I liked them better visible. They're part of what the mug is now. Pearl pulled it off the shelf last Tuesday. It survived. Some things, it turns out, are sturdier than they look. I keep the mug on the shelf where Pearl can almost reach it. That's probably not smart, but I like having it there. Visible, useful, a little imperfect in a way that shows its history. Some people would have thrown it away after it broke. I almost did. I'm glad I didn't. I think about cause and effect a lot more than I used to. Not in any abstract way, just in the plain, observable way that life keeps demonstrating if you pay attention. Ryan made choices, small ones at first, handing me a prenup over a glass of wine I didn't ask for, never finishing the fertility testing he promised he'd complete, staying late and calling it work. None of those were dramatic moments. None of them felt like turning points at the time, but they accumulated into a person, into a marriage, and eventually into a Tuesday night when he slid a settlement across the counter and waited for me to sign. I made choices too. I signed things I should have had reviewed. I stayed quiet when I had something to say. I told myself I was being reasonable when I was actually just being afraid. I don't say that to be hard on myself. I say it because I think the honest accounting matters. The version of this story, where I was purely a victim and Ryan was purely a villain, isn't quite true, and the untrue version doesn't actually help me understand anything. What I've learned, what I'm still learning, is that character is just the sum of what you do when nobody's writing it down. Marcus didn't carry boxes for the third-floor neighbor because someone was watching. He did it because that's who he is when nobody's watching. Ryan didn't hand me a check for $4,800 because he was having a bad day. He did it because that's who he is when the pressure is off and the real calculation is available. Josie from 4 years ago would not have known the difference. That version of me was optimistic in a way that had more to do with avoidance than with actual hope. I called it trusting people. It was closer to refusing to see what was already visible. I'm more clear-eyed now. Not harder. I don't think I want to be harder. But clearer. I ask different questions. I watch what people do instead of what they say they are. I've learned that a person's patterns are more honest than their best moments, and that the version of someone you see when things are easy is not the same as the version you'll need when they're not. Marcus knew who he was before I knew who he was. That used to bother me. The information asymmetry, the fact that he got to decide when I found out. I understand it better now. He'd spent years being seen as a category before he was seen as a person. That does something to you. It makes you want to be known before you're evaluated. I can't be angry about a need I understand. What I want for Pearl and June. What I think about when I watch Pearl drag Scout across the living room by his collar, and June sits in the corner carefully examining a block like it's a document requiring review, is this. I want them to know the difference between a person who tells you who they are and a person who shows you. I want them to have the patience to wait for the second kind of evidence, and I want them to know that rebuilding something after it breaks doesn't mean pretending the break didn't happen. The silver seams in that mug are not flaws. They're the record of what it survived. That's enough. That's actually everything.